The emergency lights bathed the Imperial Senate chamber in deep red, casting long shadows across the faces of the 12 elder species who had ruled the galaxy for over 100,000 years. Today, those faces showed nothing but fear-high Chancellor Torvan stood at the central podium, his silver scales catching the crimson glow as he watched the holographic display rotate slowly before the assembled representatives. The display showed their empire, 40,000 star systems connected by lines of trade and communication. And the dark stain spreading across it like a disease Varanthos Prime has fallen, he announced, his voice carrying across the silent chamber. 93 worlds in the cluster have gone dark. Monarch, 93 worlds in the Klee world. 93 worlds in the cluster have gone dark. We have lost contact with over 200 billion souls. A murmur of despair rippled through the Senate. Some of the representatives wept openly, while others sat in stunned silence. Unable to process the scale of the destruction, Admiral Kethra of the Novan species stepped forward, her forearms clasped behind her back in the military posture of her people. She had commanded the Imperial Combined Fleet for 30 years and had never lost a major engagement until now. The Vreth Dominion attacked with over 1 million bioships, she reported, her voice steady despite the horror she had witnessed. Our fleet engaged them at the Varanthos defensive line with everything we had. 200,000 warships from every species in the Empire fought for 9 days straight. She paused and took a breath before continuing. We killed 300,000 of their vessels. It made no difference. They simply grew more from the corpses of the fallen. Their bioships consume matter and reproduce within hours. For every one we destroyed, 2 more took its place. Senator Vrelic of the Methane Collective rose from his environmental pod, his gaseous form swirling with agitation. What of our energy weapons? He demanded. The plasma cannons, the fusion lances, the antimatter torpedoes. Surely these caused significant damage. Admiral Kethra shook her head slowly. The Vreth have evolved over 3 million years to absorb energy. Our weapons feed them more than they hurt them. We watched our most powerful strikes get absorbed into their hulls and converted into fuel for their regeneration. They are perfect predators, designed by evolution itself to consume civilizations. High Chancellor Torvan gripped the podium with his clawed hands, fighting to maintain his composure. What are our options, Admiral? We have none, she replied flatly. Our remaining fleet numbers less than 50,000 vessels. The Vreth Armada, approaching Imperial core space, contains over 50,000 ships, with millions more being grown in the conquered territories. At current projections, they will reach the capital within 18 standard cycles. The Senate erupted into chaos. Representatives shouted over each other, some calling for evacuation while others demanded surrender. A few even suggested mass suicide rather than being consumed by the swarm. Surrender is not possible. Admiral Kethra shouted over the din, silencing the chamber. The Vreth do not negotiate. They do not take prisoners. They do not want our resources or our territory. They want only to feed. Every living thing in this galaxy is nothing but meat to them. High Chancellor Torvan felt the weight of his position, crushing down upon him. He was supposed to lead, supposed to have answers, but he had nothing to offer his people except despair. Then we fight, he said quietly. We fight until the last ship falls and the last world burns. We will not go quietly into extinction. It was a noble sentiment, but everyone in the chamber knew it was hollow. They had already thrown everything they had at the Vreth, and it had not been enough. Nothing would ever be enough. A junior communications officer burst through the chamber doors, her chest heaving as she ran toward the central podium. Protocol demanded that she wait to be recognized, but she ignored all tradition and rushed directly to Admiral Kethra. Admiral, she gasped, we have detected something impossible. Kethra frowned at the interruption, but saw the genuine shock in the young officer's eyes. Explain yourself. Lieutenant, A hyperspace signature has emerged in Sector 7 Gamma. It is massive, Admiral. Our sensors indicate over 3,000 vessels dropping out of transit. The Admiral's frown deepened into confusion. That sector is barren. We surveyed it 12,000 years ago. There are no habitable worlds, no resources worth harvesting, no intelligent species. It has been classified as empty space since before the founding of the Empire. I know, Admiral. That is why I ran here. The signature is real, and it is heading directly toward the Vreth Armada. High Chancellor Tavan pushed forward, his earlier despair replaced by desperate hope. Could it be a lost colony? A species we overlooked? An automated defense system from a fallen civilization? Unknown, Chancellor. The vessels do not match any configuration in our database. Their design is completely alien to us. Admiral Kethra moved quickly to a secondary console and pulled up the sensor data. What she saw made her stop cold. The ships were ugly. There was no other word for them. They lacked the graceful curves and flowing lines that all civilized species incorporated into their designs. These vessels were brutal and angular, covered in what appeared to be welded metal plates and bristling with strange protrusions. Their technology appears primitive, she muttered. Chemical propulsion systems, basic metallurgical composition, energy output far below galactic standard. These ships should not even be capable of interstellar travel. But they are traveling, the lieutenant pointed out, and they are fast. Faster than their engines should allow. Senator, Relic drifted closer to examine the readings. Perhaps they are refugees fleeing the Vreth from some unknown region. Perhaps they seek our protection. Admiral Kethra highlighted the fleet's trajectory on the display. No, they are not running from the Vreth. Look at their course. They are heading directly toward the enemy armada. They are placing themselves between the Vreth and our nearest colony world. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in 3,000 primitive vessels were about to engage 50,000 Vreth bioships. It would be a slaughter. Whoever these strangers were, they were about to die for people they had never met. Should we warn them? Someone asked quietly. High Chancellor Torvan watched the unknown fleet on the display, moving steadily towards certain destruction. We should try, he said. Open all communication channels. Send greetings in every known language. Tell them what they face. The communications team worked frantically, broadcasting on every frequency and every format they could imagine. For long minutes there was no response. Then finally a signal came back. It was audio only, no visual. The voice that spoke was strange and alien, using sounds the universal translators struggled to parse. When the words finally resolved into meaning, they were simple and direct. We heard you screaming. We came. The transmission ended, and the unknown fleet continued its advance toward the enemy. High Chancellor Tovan stared at the display and felt something he had not felt in a very long time. He felt hope, mixed with a growing sense of wonder and fear. Who were these strangers who came from nowhere to die for them? And what kind of species heard the screams of distant strangers and answered? The supreme overmind of the Vreth Dominion floated at the center of its flagship, a living mountain of flesh and neural tissue that stretched for kilometers in every direction. It had existed for 3 million years and had consumed over 1,000 civilizations. Nothing in the universe could threaten it when its sensor nodes detected the approaching fleet from Sector 7 Gamma. It felt nothing but mild curiosity. The readings showed primitive vessels made of dead metal and powered by crude engines. They were insects, compared to the bioships of the Dominion, irrelevant. The overmind pulsed through its psychic network, sending the message to every ship in its armada. Continue advance toward primary feeding grounds. Ignore the approaching anomaly. 50,000 Vreth bioships continued their course toward the imperial colony world of the Sara 4, where 4 billion sentient beings waited in terror for the harvest. The overmind could taste their fear from across the void, and it was delicious far, away on the Imperial Observation Station Luminarch. High Chancellor Torvan and Admiral, Kethra watched the unknown fleet with growing fascination and dread. "They have dropped out of hyperspace," the Admiral reported, her four hands dancing across multiple control panels as she gathered data. 3,217 vessels of varying sizes. The largest appears to be their command ship, approximately 2 kilometers in length. Torvald studied the images on the main display. The ships looked like nothing he had ever seen. They were dark and angular, covered in thick armor plating that showed signs of repeated repair and modification. Some of them had scorch marks and battle damage that had been patched rather than properly fixed. They look like they have been fighting for a very long time, he observed quietly. Their construction is fascinating. Admiral Kethra added, "They appear to be built for one purpose only, war. There are no elegant lines, no aesthetic considerations, no wasted space. Every centimeter of these vessels is dedicated to either weapons or armor or engines." Senator Vrelick floated closer to examine the readings. "What kind of weapons do they carry?" The Admiral highlighted several sections of the nearest vessel. "That is the strangest part. They appear to be kinetic weapons. Mass drivers, railguns, and some kind of explosive projectile launchers. I have not seen weapons like these outside of a museum. Every advanced species abandoned kinetic weapons thousands of years ago in favor of energy-based systems. Why would anyone use such primitive armaments?" Vrelick asked. "I do not know. It makes no tactical sense. Kinetic weapons are slower, require ammunition that can run out, and deliver far less energy per shot than plasma or laser systems. Against the Vreth, they should be completely useless." High Chancellor Torvald felt his earlier hope beginning to fade. If these strangers were armed with obsolete weapons, they were going to die even faster than he had feared. "Have they responded to any more of our communications?" "Negative. They acknowledged our initial contact with that single message and have been silent ever since. They are not responding to any frequency." The unknown fleet had arranged itself into a strange formation, spreading out into a wide arc that placed them directly in the path of the Vreth Armada. It was a defensive position, clearly designed to protect the colony world behind them. "They know what they are doing," Admiral Kethra admitted grudgingly. "That formation maximizes their firing arcs while minimizing the angles of attack available to the enemy. Whoever is commanding that fleet understands warfare. But they cannot possibly win," Torvald said. 3,000 against 50,000 with inferior technology. It is suicide. Perhaps they do not intend to win. Perhaps they intend to delay the Vreth long enough for the colony to evacuate. Can they? The Admiral ran calculations on her console and shook her head. At best, they can survive for 2 or 3 hours. The colony would need at least 12 hours to complete evacuation. It is not enough time. On the display, the Vreth Armada continued its advance, completely ignoring the unknown fleet blocking their path. The bioships moved with the lazy confidence of apex predators who had never encountered a true threat then. Something unexpected happened, one of the unknown. Vessels broke formation and accelerated toward the Vreth line at incredible speed. It was one of the smaller ships, barely 500 meters long, and it was heading directly toward the largest concentration of enemy vessels. "What are they doing?" Senator Vrelick demanded. The small ship plunged into the Vreth formation, and then, without warning, it exploded. The blast was enormous, far larger than any ship its size should have been capable of producing. The explosion consumed over 100 Vreth bioships in an instant and sent shock waves rippling through dozens more alarms screamed across the luminarch. As sensors struggled to process what had just happened, they used their own ship as a weapon. Admiral Kethra whispered in disbelief. They filled it with explosives and flew it directly into the enemy. The crew must have known they would die. High Chancellor, Torvald stared at the expanding debris field where 100 Vreth ships had been moments before. What kind of species does that? Before anyone could answer, a new transmission came through from the unknown fleet. This time, it was visual as well as audio. A creature appeared on the screen. It was bipedal, with 2 arms and 2 legs, covered in some kind of fitted material that resembled a uniform. Its face was flat with 2 forward-facing eyes, a small nose, and a mouth that curved upward at the corners in what might have been a smile. The creature spoke in that same strange language. And this time, the translators worked faster. This is Admiral Chen Wei of the United Earth Defense Fleet. We are here to help you. Please evacuate your civilians while we engage the enemy. We will hold the line as long as we can. Senator Vrelok made a choking sound. Did she say Earth? There is no inhabited world called Earth in any of our records. Admiral Kethra was already searching the archives. Wait, there is a reference. 12,000 years ago, a survey vessel passed through Sector 7 Gamma and cataloged the native species of a small blue world. They were classified as primitive tool users, barely capable of fire and basic agriculture. The surveyor predicted they would likely go extinct before achieving spaceflight. She pulled up the ancient report and displayed it on screen next to the image of Admiral Chen Wei. The species was called human. High Chancellor Tovan looked at the ancient survey data and then at the woman on the screen. Commander of a fleet that had crossed thousands of light years to fight an enemy they had never met. In 12,000 years, they went from fire to starships? That is impossible, Senator Vrelok insisted. No species develops that quickly. It takes hundreds of thousands of years to achieve spaceflight. It took my people over 1 million years. On the display, the human fleet began to move, advancing toward the Vreth Armada with a speed and coordination that seemed impossible for such primitive vessels. Admiral Chen Wei spoke again, her voice calm and steady despite the overwhelming odds she faced. We do not know you. We do not know your customs or your history or your wars. But we heard your cries for help across the darkness between stars, and we could not ignore them. Today we stand with you. Today we fight together. The transmission ended, High Chancellor. Torvan watched the human fleet charge toward 50,000 Vreth bioships and realized he was witnessing something that would change the galaxy forever. He just did not know yet whether that change would be salvation or something far more terrifying. The Supreme Overmind finally turned its attention to the small fleet of primitive vessels blocking its path. It had ignored them until now, confident that they posed no threat. But the destruction of 100 ships by a single suicide attack demanded a response. Destroy them, it commanded through the psychic network. Consume their metal husks and feed their organic components to the spawning pools. 10,000 Vreth bioships broke formation and surged toward the human fleet, their organic hulls pulsing with hungry anticipation. They had consumed countless species across millions of years, and these strange newcomers would be no different. Admiral Chen Wei watched the enemy approach on the tactical display of her flagship, the U.E.'s Defiance. Around her, the bridge crew worked with quiet efficiency, their faces showing no fear despite the impossible odds. All ships. This is the Admiral, she announced over the fleet-wide channel. Hold formation until they reach optimal range. Remember your training and trust your weapons. We did not come all this way to lose. The Vreth bioships closed the distance rapidly, their forms twisting and shifting as they prepared to unleash their energy-draining attacks. Plasma sacs swell along their hulls. Ready to fire. Range 50,000 kilometers, her tactical officer reported. Hold range 30,000 kilometers. Hold range 10,000 kilometers. Admiral Chen Wei smiled grimly. All ships, fire. 3,000 human. Warships opened fire simultaneously, and the void between the fleets filled with death. The Vreth expected energy weapons. They expected plasma and lasers and particle beams that their evolved hulls could absorb and convert into fuel. Instead, they received something far worse: tungsten slugs, the size of ground vehicles accelerated to 1/10 the speed of light. slammed into the bioships with the force of small nuclear explosions. The kinetic energy could not be absorbed or redirected. It simply punched through regenerative flesh and exited out the other side, leaving gaping holes that no amount of healing could fix. Explosive shells followed the tungsten rounds, detonating inside the wounds and turning Vreth organs into expanding clouds of frozen meat. Missile swarms corkscrewed through the chaos, their warheads carrying payloads of corrosive chemicals, designed to dissolve organic matter. The first wave of Vreth ships died in seconds. One moment there were 10,000 bioships charging forward, and the next there were barely 6,000. The rest reduced to drifting corpses and scattered debris. Supreme Overmind felt something it had never experienced in 3 million years of existence. It felt surprise, followed quickly by something that might have been fear. Impossible. It pulsed through the network. How do dead metal weapons cause such damage? It did not understand. It could not understand. For millions of years, the Vreth had evolved specifically to counter energy-based weapons because every advanced species used energy weapons. The idea that anyone would choose to use kinetic weapons was so absurd that evolution had never bothered to defend against them. Admiral Chen Wei pressed the advantage without hesitation. All ships advance. Push into their formation. Do not let them regroup. The human fleet surged forward, plunging directly into the heart of the Vreth Armada. It was insane by any standard tactical doctrine. Outnumbered vessels should stay at range and use mobility to survive, not charge into the enemy mass. But the humans were not fighting to survive. They were fighting to kill at close range. The battle became a nightmare of fire and blood. Human ships wove between bioships, their railguns firing continuously in every direction. When a human vessel took damage, it did not retreat. It rotated to present fresh armor while the damaged sections were repaired by crews working in hard vacuum. When repairs became impossible, the crews did not surrender. Instead, they aimed their crippled ships at the largest enemy targets and accelerated. Adding their own deaths to the toll they extracted from the swarm, the Vreth tried to adapt. They attempted to ram the human ships, to latch onto them and consume them directly. But the humans had anticipated this. Any bioship that got too close was met with point-blank cannon fire and, when that failed, with explosive charges that detonated along the hull on the Luminarch. Admiral Kethra watched the battle with growing horror and amazement. They are using their own ships as weapons, she reported to the Senate, her voice barely above a whisper. When a vessel becomes too damaged to fight effectively, the crew deliberately crashes it into the enemy. They have lost over 500 ships in the first hour of fighting, and not a single one of those ships attempted to withdraw. High Chancellor Torvan could not look away from the display. What is the enemy casualty count? Over 12,000 Vreth ships destroyed in the first hour alone. The humans are killing at a ratio of nearly 20-1. Senator Vrelok made a sound of disbelief. That is impossible. How can such primitive weapons cause such destruction? Because the Vreth never expected to face primitive weapons. Admiral Kethra explained slowly. Their entire biology evolved to counter energy attacks. They have no defense against simple mass moving at relativistic speeds. The humans are not fighting with advanced technology. They are fighting with physics. The battle raged for hours, and the humans refused to stop. Ship after ship fell, their crews dying in fire and vacuum. But for every human vessel destroyed, dozens of Vreth bioships were torn apart. The psychic screams of dying Vreth echoed across subspace. A constant wail of agony and confusion. The Supreme Overmind threw more and more ships into the battle, trying to overwhelm the humans through sheer numbers. But the tactic failed. The humans simply fought harder, their weapons firing without pause, their ships maneuvering with desperate precision. 11 hours after the battle began, the impossible happened. The Vreth Armada broke. For the first time in 3 million years, Vreth ships turned and fled from an enemy. The Supreme Overmind screamed commands through the psychic network. ordering its forces to hold their ground. The terror had infected the swarm. Individual ships ignored the Overmind's will and ran for the safety of Deep Space Admiral. Chen Wei did not allow them to escape. All ships pursue, she ordered. Do not let them regroup. Do not let them warn the others. Hunt them down and destroy every last one. The human fleet, now reduced to barely 1,500 vessels, charged after the fleeing Vreth with the same ferocity they had shown in defense. They had not come to protect a single world. They had come to end a threat. High Chancellor Torvan watched the pursuit on the display and felt a chill run down his spine. The humans had saved the colony, had saved billions of lives, but there was something in the way they fought that terrified him. They did not stop. They did not rest. They did not show mercy. Once they committed to a fight, they seemed incapable of doing anything except winning or dying in the attempt. What manner of species fights like this? He asked quietly. Admiral Kethra had no answer. In all her years of military service, she had never seen anything like the humans. They fought with a combination of brutal efficiency and almost religious dedication that defied explanation on the display. The last Vreth ships were being hunted down and destroyed, their screams fading as the swarm that had terrorized the galaxy for 300 years was methodically exterminated to supreme Overmind. Ancient and powerful and utterly unprepared for an enemy like humanity. Tried to flee toward its homeworld. The humans followed, and they did not stop until the screaming ended. 3 weeks after the battle, a diplomatic convoy from the Celestin Empire arrived at the coordinates provided by the human fleet. They found the humans waiting for them in orbit around a small blue world that gleamed like a sapphire against the darkness of Space Ambassador. The Lara of the Alice species led the delegation, accompanied by scientists, historians, and military observers. High Chancellor Torvan had given her a single mission: learn everything possible about these strange creatures who had saved the Empire from extinction. The humans welcomed them aboard a massive orbital station that hung above their homeworld. The station was ugly by Imperial standards, all function and no elegance. But it was enormous and clearly capable of housing millions of inhabitants. A woman met them in the docking bay. She was small by human standards, with dark hair streaked with gray and eyes that seemed to hold both warmth and hidden steel. She introduced herself as Ambassador Sarah Chun, sister of the Admiral who had led the fleet. "Welcome to Sol Station," she said with a smile that showed flat white teeth. "We are honored to receive representatives of the Celestin Empire. Please, come with me. There is much to discuss." Ambassador Thalara followed the human through corridors filled with activity. Everywhere she looked, humans were working, building, repairing, creating. They moved with a constant energy that made the Alice feel tired just watching them. "Your people do not rest." She observed Ambassador Chun laughed. A strange barking sound that the translators identified as expressing amusement. "We rest. We just do not rest for long. There is always too much to do." They arrived at a conference room where a delegation of human officials waited. Scientists in white coats, military officers in dark uniforms, and civilian leaders in formal attire. They all rose when the Imperial delegation entered, a gesture of respect that Thalara found oddly touching. "Before we begin," Ambassador Chun said, "I imagine you have many questions. We will answer them as honestly as we can. We believe that friendship must be built on truth." Thalara activated her recording device. "Our first question is simple. Who are you? Where do you come from? Our records show that your world was surveyed 12,000 years ago, and your species was classified as primitive. How did you advance so quickly?" Ambassador Chun nodded as if she had expected the question. 12,000 years ago, my ancestors were indeed primitive. We had just learned to grow crops and build permanent settlements. We knew nothing of mathematics or science or the stars above us. She gestured to a display screen that showed images of human history. Over the following millennia, we developed writing, philosophy, medicine, and eventually technology. We built great civilizations and watched them fall. We fought countless wars among ourselves. Sometimes over resources, sometimes over beliefs, sometimes for reasons we no longer remember. The images showed humans at war, cities burning, weapons of increasing sophistication being used against their own kind. We came very close to destroying ourselves many times. 500 years ago, we developed nuclear weapons and immediately used them. 200 years ago, we nearly made our planet uninhabitable through pollution and climate change. 100 years ago, a pandemic killed over 1 billion of our people. Ambassador Thalara felt a chill. No species in Imperial records had ever survived such repeated self-inflicted catastrophes. How did you survive? We adapt, Ambassador Chen said simply. It is what we do. Every time we fall, we get back up. Every time we face extinction, we find a way to continue. We are not the smartest species, nor the strongest, nor the longest lived. But we are perhaps the most stubborn creatures in the galaxy. One of the Imperial scientists leaned forward. Your rate of technological advancement is unprecedented. Our species took over 1 million years to develop spaceflight. You did it in less than 12,000. How is this possible? A human scientist, an elderly man with wild white hair, answered this question. We do not know for certain. We think it has something to do with our short lifespans. We only live for about 80 years on average, sometimes a bit more with modern medicine. This means each generation is desperate to accomplish as much as possible before they die. We cannot afford to be patient. He smiled sadly. We also think it has something to do with competition. We spend most of our history fighting each other, and war drives innovation. Every weapon we invented forced us to invent better defenses, which forced us to invent better weapons. It was a terrible cycle, but it made us very good at developing technology quickly. Ambassador Thalara processed this information with growing unease. A species that advanced through constant self-inflicted violence was disturbing on a fundamental level. If you spent so much time fighting each other, why did you come to help us? You did not know us. You had no alliance with us. You owed us nothing. Ambassador Chen was quiet for a moment before answering. 20 years ago, we developed sensors capable of detecting signals from deep space. Almost immediately, we began picking up transmissions from your region of the galaxy. At first, we could not understand them, but eventually, our linguists decoded enough to grasp the basics. She looked directly at Thalara, her eyes intense. We heard your distress calls. We heard entire worlds screaming for help as the breath consumed them. We heard children crying for their parents, and parents crying for their children. We heard civilizations begging for salvation that never came. Her voice hardened, and we could not ignore it. We tried, believe me. Our leaders argued for years about whether we should intervene in a conflict that did not concern us, in a region of space we had never visited, for species we had never met. What changed their minds? A vote. We showed our people the recordings, let them hear the screams for themselves, and then we asked them what they wanted to do. The vote was nearly unanimous. We had to help. Ambassador Thalara struggled to comprehend this. You built a war fleet and crossed 4,000 light years to fight an enemy that had nothing to do with you, because your people heard strangers screaming and could not stand to do nothing. Yes, you lost over 1,700 ships and tens of thousands of lives for people you had never met. Yes. Why? Ambassador Chen smiled, but there was something fierce behind it, because that is who we are. We are not a perfect species, Ambassador. We have done terrible things to ourselves and to our world. We are violent and irrational and sometimes cruel. But there is one thing we cannot tolerate, and that is the suffering of innocents. She leaned forward. When we hear someone screaming for help, we answer. It does not matter if they are human or alien, friend or stranger. If someone is in pain and we can do something about it, we will. It is perhaps our greatest virtue and our greatest flaw. We care too much, even when caring costs us everything. The conference continued for hours as the humans explained their history, their technology, their society, and their hopes for the future. By the end, Ambassador Thalara had compiled a detailed report for the High Chancellor, but as she returned to her ship, one thought kept echoing through her mind. The humans had heard screaming across the void between stars and had built a fleet of warships in response. They had crossed impossible distances and fought impossible battles and died in impossible numbers. All because they could not stand to let strangers suffer alone. They were the most compassionate species Thalara had ever encountered. They were also, she realized with a growing sense of unease, potentially the most dangerous species that would cross the galaxy to protect strangers, would surely do the same to punish those who wronged them. And a species that had spent its entire existence fighting itself would have no hesitation about fighting anyone else. The humans had saved the Empire. But what would happen if they ever decided the Empire needed to be changed? 6 months after the destruction of the Vreth Dominion, High Chancellor Torvan convened a special session of the Imperial Senate. The emergency lights had been replaced with the normal soft glow of peacetime, but the tension in the chamber was greater than ever. "The threat is ended," Torvan announced, his voice carrying across the assembly of 12 elder species. The human fleet pursued the Supreme Overmind to the Vreth homeworld and destroyed it utterly. There are no more Vreth. The species that terrorized our civilization for 300 years has been completely exterminated. A murmur of relief rippled through the Senate, but it was subdued. Everyone present knew that the Chancellor had not called this session to celebrate. However, Torvan continued, "We must now discuss a new matter. We must discuss the humans." Admiral Kethra stepped forward to present her analysis. She had spent the past 6 months studying everything the Empire knew about humanity, and her findings had kept her awake for many sleepless nights. "The humans are an anomaly," she began. "By every standard metric, they should be inferior to any of the elder species. Their technology, while effective, is crude compared to ours. Their bodies are fragile and easily damaged. Their lifespans are pitifully short, barely a century at most." She pulled up a holographic display showing comparative data, and yet they achieved in 12,000 years what took most of us hundreds of thousands or millions of years. They developed spaceflight, artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, and faster-than-light travel in a fraction of the time our species required. Senator Vrelak drifted forward in his environmental pod. "How is this possible? We have examined their biology. They are not more intelligent than us. Their brains are not larger or more complex. What makes them different?" "Several factors," Admiral Kethra replied. "First, their short lifespans create a sense of urgency that longer-lived species do not experience. Every human knows they will die soon, so they work frantically to accomplish as much as possible before their time runs out. Second, their history of constant conflict forced them to innovate at incredible speeds. They spent most of their existence fighting themselves, and that competition drove technological advancement far faster than peaceful development ever could. Third, and most importantly, they adapt. They do not wait for evolution to solve problems. They change their behavior, their technology, their very societies within single generations. They are perhaps the most flexible, intelligent species we have ever encountered." High Chancellor Torvan raised a hand. "Admiral, your analysis so far has focused on their capabilities. What about their intentions? What do the humans want?" Admiral Kethra hesitated before answering. "That is the most troubling part, Chancellor. I do not believe the humans themselves know what they want. They are a species driven by emotion as much as logic. They make decisions based on what they feel is right, rather than what is strategically optimal. They crossed the galaxy to save us because they heard screaming and felt compelled to respond. They exterminated the Vreth, not because the Vreth threatened them directly, but because they found the Vreth's behavior morally unacceptable." She pulled up recordings from the diplomatic mission. "The human ambassador told us that her people voted to intervene after hearing our distress calls. They showed the recordings to their entire population and asked them what they wanted to do. The decision to sacrifice thousands of lives and billions in resources was made because ordinary humans could not stand the thought of strangers suffering. Senator Vrelak made a dismissive sound. Then they are simply compassionate. That is not threatening. On the contrary, Admiral Kethra replied, it is perhaps the most threatening trait imaginable. Consider, the humans did not help us because of treaties or alliances or strategic interests. They helped us because they felt it was morally correct. What happens when they encounter something else they find morally unacceptable? What happens when they learn about the labor practices in the outer colonies? What happens when they discover how we treat lesser developed species within our borders? What happens when they decide that some aspect of our civilization needs to change? The Senate chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. High Chancellor Torvan spoke slowly. You are suggesting that the same compassion that saved us could one day be turned against us. I am suggesting that we have no idea what will motivate the humans in the future. They are unpredictable. They act on emotion. They have a strong sense of justice that does not always align with practical considerations. And they have proven that they are willing to wage total war against anyone they deem to be engaging in evil. They exterminated the Vreth. Chancellor. They did not defeat them or contain them or negotiate peace. They hunted them to extinction because they decided the Vreth were too dangerous to exist. What happens if they ever decide the same about us? The Senate erupted into worried discussion, but High Chancellor Torvan raised his hand for silence. There is more, is there not, Admiral? Admiral Kethra nodded grimly. The humans have requested a formal alliance. They want to establish diplomatic relations, trade agreements, cultural exchanges, and mutual defense pacts. Ambassador Chun has already arrived at the capital and is waiting to present their proposal. What do you recommend? The Admiral was quiet for a long moment. I recommend we accept. We have no choice. The humans have proven they can defeat enemies that were beyond our ability to stop. If we refuse their friendship, we risk making them our enemies. And we have seen what happens to the enemies of humanity. Furthermore, keeping them close allows us to monitor their development. They are still primitive compared to us in many ways. If we form an alliance, we can guide their growth, influence their values, and ensure that when they reach their full potential, they see us as friends rather than as obstacles to be overcome. High Chancellor Torvan considered this advice. It made sense, but it also felt like trying to befriend her in hopes of not becoming prey. Bring in the human ambassador. The chamber doors opened and a small figure entered. Ambassador Sarah Chun walked with quiet confidence, her expression warm and friendly. She looked fragile and harmless, barely reaching the shoulder of most imperial species. But Torvan remembered the recordings from the battle, remembered watching human ships ram enemy vessels at full speed, remembered the cold efficiency with which they had hunted down and destroyed entire species. This small, smiling creature represented something far more dangerous than the Vreth had ever been. High Chancellor, Ambassador Chun said with a bow, thank you for receiving me. My people are honored to stand before the representatives of such ancient and wise civilizations. The honor is ours. Ambassador, your fleet saved us from extinction. We are in your debt. We did not help you to create a debt. We helped you because it was the right thing to do. We ask nothing in return except friendship and the chance to learn from your greater experience. Her words were sincere. Torvan could tell. She genuinely meant what she said. And somehow that made it worse. We accept your offer of alliance, he announced. From this day forward, the Celestin Empire and the United Earth Government shall be partners in peace and mutual defense. Ambassador Chun smiled, her eyes bright with what appeared to be genuine happiness. Thank you, Chancellor. You will not regret this decision. Humanity is young, and we have much to learn. But we are loyal friends, and we never forget those who treated us with kindness. She paused, and something flickered behind her warm expression. We also never forget those who treated us otherwise. High Chancellor Torvan looked at Ambassador Chun. This representative of a species that had risen from nothing to burn an immortal god alive, and realized the profound truth of the Empire's new situation. The humans had saved them. The humans had been kind and generous and brave. The humans wanted nothing more than friendship and cooperation, and yet the Empire had never been in more danger because one day the humans would grow strong enough to reshape the galaxy according to their values. One day, they would look at the Empire and decide whether it met their standards of morality. One day, they would judge and heaven help anyone who was found wanting. The humans had arrived. And nothing would ever be the same. High Chancellor Torvan smiled at Ambassador Chen and welcomed her to the Empire, while deep in his hearts, a new fear took root and began to grow. The Vreth had wanted to consume them. The humans wanted to befriend them. He was no longer certain which was more terrifying,